Okay, if everyone could make their way to the front of the stage, we're going to start in just about 14 seconds. You have 14 seconds to get to your seat. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Columbian's Economic Forecast. My name is Will Campbell. I am the editor of the Columbian. I'm a fourth-generation owner of the Columbian, and along with my brother Ben Campbell, who's the publisher. So thank you all for supporting us with this event and supporting us with our news coverage online. Thank you so much. So our economic forecast this year might be the least accurate one we've ever had, but I say that almost every year. We changed things up a little bit this year. It's at 3 o'clock now. It used to be a breakfast before. No, the breakfast is no more. We also have a live stream of this event now too. So if you go to Columbian.com, you'll see a homepage takeover. And this event is being live streamed on the Columbian.com for all the viewers in Clark County and beyond to watch. So for all of you viewers online, welcome. So, but with all the updates, the intent of the economic forecast is still the same as it's been for 39 years. This is our 39th year doing it. And the goal is to be the fastest and most interesting way to learn about our local economy. So I'm very excited for the speakers that we'll have today, and our panelists too. So Futurespective is the name of our event this year for a few reasons. We have a former keynote speaker, Matthew Gardner, joining us this year. He was our speaker about 4 years ago. And we have a former president leading the country again too. So we're facing changes in many, many things in the economy, maybe more than we've seen. There's potentially more uncertainty than our economists have ever seen in their careers. There are new policies, new taxes, tariffs, inflation, and many more metrics that are uncertain. So we can look to the past to predict the year ahead, so to speak. So I want to thank our sponsors for making this whole event happen tonight. We have the Port of Vancouver. If everyone could give our sponsors a round of applause, this would not happen without them. Port of Vancouver is sponsoring our live stream on Columbian.com and on the YouTube channel. We also have major sponsors, Alliant Insurance. Thank you, Alliant. And we also have Peace Health. Thank you, Peace Health. And supporting us for the first time this year, we have the Clark College Foundation. Thank you so much, Clark College Foundation. So at each of your seats, you'll find a special section that we will be publishing in tomorrow's paper, so you get a bit of a sneak peek. And the publication was made possible through the generous sponsor of our special section, WSP, Tappaney, and Ferguson Wellman. Thank you so much. And I want to have a big shout out to our table sponsors also. Bank of America, Lauris Wealth Management, and Pacific West Bank. Thank you, Lauris. Thank you, Bank of America, and thank you, Pacific West Bank. So for 15 years, our presenting sponsor has been Riverview Bank. Riverview has been a good partner with this event and is one of the biggest reasons that we're having this here. So I wanted to welcome to the stage the new president and CEO of Riverview Bank. She's has experience with over 25 years in leadership roles with organizations such as Columbia Bank, Utah First, and Numerica Credit Union. So her expertise includes retail and digital banking, commercial and business banking, wealth management, corporate marketing, communications, community impact, and philanthropy. So please welcome to the stage Nicole Sherman. Thanks, Nicole. Thank you. I'll give you a high five, too.
Okay. And then Knuckles? I mean, how cool are you, Will?
I'll do Knuckles.
All right. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Nicole Sherman, and I am pleased to be here on behalf of Riverview Bank and Riverview Trust Company. And Evan, are you out there? Evan, please rise and shine. Oh, there you are at the back. Evan Sowers is our CEO of Riverview Trust Company. Thank you. On behalf of all of us today, it is a pleasure to sponsor this event. I got to tell you, I have been with Riverview for 6 months. Okay, maybe it's 7 now, but who's counting? And we are energized and ready to take on life as we go forward with a storm. I think we are so well capitalized, and we are in the business of building our community. And one thing that I hold true to myself is strong businesses make strong communities. And so we are here to build with you your company. And I know that I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of legacy at Riverview Bank. And, you know, I bring to mind today Pat Schaefer. And I trust that I can continue the great legacy that he started. As I met Pat for the first time, all he said to me, those of you who know Pat, all he said is, "You'll do good. Don't screw it up." So I'm going to ask you to do something that is a little crazy because I'm a little crazy. So everybody has a device, right? You have your phone with you. So can I ask you to just take your phone out for a second and open your contacts or your texts or whatever? I'm going to give you a telephone number to put in your device. Or if you want to go old school, there's just write it down. There's pens and there's notepads in front of you. Thank you to the Columbian for doing this just for me, putting the notepads out. I appreciate it. I'm going to give you my personal cell phone number. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I believe that as a community bank, the only headquartered bank locally in our community, I believe that access is important. And you should be able to get a hold of me as the CEO 24/7. That's how serious I am about banking our communities. Now, the only caveat is there can be no judgment on the area code, because some of you are too young to remember, but many of us remember the first gray brick cell phone? Yeah, well, I still have that telephone number. I have been in Washington for over 20 years now. But the phone number is area code 801. No is the answer to your next question. That's Utah, by the way. 801-707-4045. 801-707-4045. I just realized that this is also being live streamed. Hey team, think of the business that's gonna roll in, all right? It's all gonna come through my cell phone, but we got this. And it's Nicole Sherman, Nicolesherman. I wanna thank our clients who are here today. I see many of you. I'm excited to meet those who I haven't met. I wanna thank everybody for taking their time to care enough about our businesses and our community, to care about the economy and how we can contribute to it. And more than anything, if you don't already bank with Riverview, we're coming for you. And with that, let's have a great time. Will, I think it's going back to you.
Okay, so I want to introduce our keynote. In 2022, we invited, who was at the time Windermer's chief economist, to speak at our economic forecast. And so he came and he talked, and he was an instant crowd favorite, I'd say. And I think from the second that he ended his presentation, I was just wondering when he'd be able to come back. And so Here we are 3 years later, welcoming back our keynote. One of the interesting things was how different his perspective was with Scott Bailey's, who's our second presenter today. So keep that in mind when you're listening to these two economists. But Matthew is widely recognized as being one of the most foremost real estate economists in the entire country. He's traveling around. He does I think over 75 speaking engagements a year at this point. And so he is quite the expert. And his economic forecasts, to name a few, are used by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and his housing forecasts are used by Reuters, that's a big name in journalism. So I wanted to welcome to the stage Matthew Gardner.
I'll come this way. Okay, thank you. Will, the least, most accurate, oh Lord, try again. Push, there you go. The least accurate forecast ever. Is that what you said earlier on? It was, wasn't it? Thank you, maybe, right. Interesting times in which we live, aren't they? I think you'll find. It's the great thing about it being an economist is that when the economy is going great, no one cares about us. Right about now, we become rock stars. By all of you here. So thank you for the invitation to come back and address you again. I'll talk a bit about real estate a little later on, but I was actually asked to talk more macro. What the heck is going on? These are interesting times. You know, I'm an old economist. I normally wake up around 4:30 in the morning, turn on Bloomberg News, it's great, find out what's happening in the world. Now I wake up, check X, what has he said now? Predictability is very important, and certainly it's very important for forecasters. Knowing what's going on in the past, certainly to define where we think the future is going to go, is fundamental to economics. But the trouble is things are changing so remarkably rapidly right now. So we'll start off with what's going on bigger picture, and here, the US economy. My chart for core inflation, CPI, one of the measures of it, and my forecast, but quite frankly, my forecast can change on a minute-by-minute basis. Up until the election, Chair Powell, Federal Reserve, was doing remarkably well. It started to raise interest rates to slow the economy down, to start taking care of inflation, because that is one of their two jobs at the Fed. It's called price stability or stable inflation. The other one is full employment. Now, I can argue you can't have one and the other at the same time, but that's a topic for a cocktail later on. But it was doing well. And as far as Chair Powell was thinking, this is going to be great. I'm getting inflation taken care of, full employment still there, sub 4% on the jobless rate. I'm out in 2026, jump on my steed, ride off into the sunset, saying, we got it right. Now, why is that important? So, over history, when the Fed looks to raise interest rates to slow down the economy, what happens? We have a recession. They have got it right twice in history. They suck at it. I really do. But this time around, it was going great until the election, and then it wasn't. Now, my forecast is that I expect that we're not going to see inflation drop further, quite frankly, from where it is today. Could that change? Certainly it could. But the big issue right now is certainly tariffs, and I'll talk about tariffs in a little while. So, the inflation picture, is it good right now? No, it's kind of stable. The numbers weren't too great. And to give you an idea here, so month on month, you can see here, and also the annualized for total inflation running at 3%, core, Xing food and energy, a bit richer. But here are some things which are interested in, is goods. And they were heavily disinflationary for quite a while. This is actually a very, very good thing. But now you can see here, no, that's turned around. Now, what is particularly interesting to me about that is the election. People voted with their pocketbooks, with a view that, back earlier on that last chart, I said inflation was getting better, and most people, economists, would agree with it, that it was, apart from my wife. She's like, oh, hell no, it's not getting better. Why? You ever seen the price of eggs these days? Man, it is very, very true. But we're actually seeing, we're seeing a significant deflationary factor. That has now stopped. Food's going up, energy certainly, but shelter is one of the biggest concerns And this is important to talk about just briefly. Why? It makes up a very significant component, about 35% of core inflation. So bear with me a bit on this one. Rent of primary residences, those who rent, and the changes in rent, that makes sense. But then do an owner's equivalent rent, which is stupid, you should never do it. We are the only country that is special enough to say we can figure it out. They can't, it's always wrong. But because it's included, and again, because it is such a large component of CPI, well, you've got to count it. But there's a different way to look at it, and it's this. It's the new tenant rent index. And I say that because we will tend to find that the overall shelter index is going to follow where that rent index is. So here we take the rent index, move it forward by 4 quarters, and ultimately I expect to see the shelter component of CPI drop. So that's the good part, because as we start seeing further softening in that part of it, then overall we can expect to see core inflation start to drop. But mentioning eggs, I had to. The year-over-year price change, it's up a lot. 53%, 15% on the month. H5N1 is to blame, which I won't talk about that. But ultimately, we are going to be looking at what's going to happen with inflation going forward as it pertains to, if we don't start seeing significant drops, and I don't think we will, well, we've got the midterm elections coming up. That could be very interesting to see the direction that voters go if we are not getting close to that 2% threshold. Now, I'm not a fan of CPI, Consumer Price Index. It takes an arbitrary basket of goods. And also, they ran a 5-year seasonality adjustment on it as well. So it could be wrong, it could get changed. But I look at personal consumption, and that actually is a better way. It looks at what we are buying relative to what this basket of goods would cost if we were to buy it. And here, that started to tick up a little bit as well. So the concerns that I have, of one, we have a president saying to the Fed, reduce interest rates. Why? Is that inflationary? Oh, you betcha it is. So again, you can't have the best of both worlds. We want lower interest rates, but we still want the stock market to go up by 10, 15% per year. You can't have both. Do I expect to see inflation simmering where it is right now? Is it going to get down to our 2% target? No, it won't. Wrong. Say it won't. It is highly unlikely that we'll see that kind of a drop. Mainly for one simple reason, and it's this. I could have used a different T, but I didn't. Tariffs and taxes and trade. And this is where the biggest part of uncertainty comes along. Now, why is uncertainty important? What do we do as consumers if we're not sure about the future? Well, we do nothing. We freeze in place. What do businesses do in the same situation? They do the same thing. Are they going to hire more people? No, they are going to increase productivity. And how do they do that? Work harder. Less help, more, just work harder. And so you don't see any changes there. So tariffs are interesting. Very simply speaking, tariffs, they are a supply-side shock. And unfortunately, a lot of people out there still believe when the president says, it's going to be fine. But who's going to pay for this? China's going to pay for it. Or Canada's going to pay for it, or Mexico's going to pay for it. No, it doesn't work that way. The importer of that good is the one that pays. And don't tell me they're not going to try and pass that through to you and I in terms of the tail end of prices. In fact, Walmart, their quarterly earnings, which came out, I think, yesterday or this morning, were saying the same thing. They're saying, we're expecting slower growth because they are certainly going to take those additional costs and push them through. Is that inflationary? Yeah, you betcha it is. So any argument saying, oh, it's going to be fine because with all this money, we're going to start buying things domestically. No, we're not. It's too expensive still for that to happen. So it's very, very unlikely. And we know what happened last time around with the tariffs that were put on. It cost us about $51 billion per year in increasing costs. So there was that transfer to the end user. And given the fact that 70% of the US economy is consumption, us buying things. And so are we going to get hit with this? I think quite likely we will. Now, the president can talk about the tariffs and why they're great. And his biggest argument is they increase revenues. And why is that important as far as he's concerned? Well, if we're increasing federal revenues, that's going to offset all the tax cuts which are coming. No, they won't. We import about $3.9 trillion worth of goods every year. We're going to have to tariff everything. And that's just goods, tariff goods and services. And even then, we're still not going to get anywhere close to addressing a balanced budget. Do you know the last year that America actually had a balanced budget? As in, we bought in as much as we spent? 1995, under Clinton, literally. That's the last time we spent as much as we bought in. Been a very long time. And ergo, that's why the national debt now is running north of $36 trillion and still rising and will continue to rise. But it's going to be okay, because this is the problem we're leaving for our kids and our grandkids. Like, hey, here you go, guys, have this one. It's going to be great. So does it need to be addressed? Yes, it does. But yeah, you can grow federal revenues, but again, on the back of who? On the back of us. Negotiating? Is it a negotiation ploy? Yes, we know that. We've seen it happening already, and mainly because of what's happening with the European Union. All of a sudden, we looked at how much they were taxing us for cars that they were importing into the EU, which was 10%. And yet, the other way around, it was actually about 2.5%. So they have seen some changes. But our friends up in Canada, I was giving a speech 2 weeks ago to the Canadian Central Bank in Victoria. Yeah, the whole 51st state joke did not go down well. I'm like, oh, Trudeau, Trudeau. No. They're not happy with us, and they really aren't. So could we see the full extent of tariffs continue to the degree that the president wants? Probably not. But are they going to go away completely? No. I mean, we know this. Under the first Trump administration, we started taxing lumber, the Canadian softwood lumber tariff. That's a great thing. What did the Canadians ever do bad for us? But that never went away. Through the first Trump administration and through Biden, there was still that tax on imported lumber. So it could be a ploy. But do I expect to see all the ideas of tariffs go away? I'm afraid I don't. But reciprocity, certainly. And there is a big concern that I have there. Now, if you think this way, it can work, but if it doesn't, trade wars happen, and trade wars are not good for anyone, and they really aren't. So what does all this really mean? It means a sense of uncertainty, which hits consumers. I mentioned earlier, 70% of the US economy is consumption. It hits businesses. They start being a bit more thoughtful, slowing down a bit. But also if those raw materials and the cost of those goes up to beyond a certain level, well, then it's possible that we'll find these companies just either shut down or they slow down, start seeing more layoffs. So we've got to be very, very careful what we wish for there. So I actually ran a model a while ago. I said, okay, let's look at it this way. 25% tax on Canadian and Mexican goods. This does carve out energy, by the way, from Canada, which is actually lower at 10%. It also includes tariffs from Canada, which are low dollar tariffs. What does it mean? Prices go up. Core CPI will raise by over 0.5%. That pushes us close to 4%. Is that a good thing? No, it's not. Is it going to cause the Fed more conniptions? Absolutely it will. Because the Fed right now are taking a wait-and-see stance. Now, up until the election, Wall Street said we're going to have 10 cuts. But the Fed funds rate is going to be back down to 0 again. Woohoo. No, afraid not. It's going to be considerably less than that. In fact, I do not expect to see one cut by the Fed until at the earliest September. I still could potentially see 2 cuts this year. A lot of people are saying none. But the last thing the Fed wants to have to do is what? Raise rates. The equity markets will they'll hate that more than anything else. So one part of this will be prices go up. Second part, yeah, as prices rise, what do? We stop spending. And that hits consumer confidence, business confidence, hits the equity markets. And so we could potentially go back into or actually have that recession. So the elusive ability for the Fed to actually raise rates, slow the economy down, not have a recession, which they've only got right twice, it might still just be twice because of our concerns. And if it goes on a bit longer, then stagflation, basically high inflation and low productivity. So with China, it's a bit more severe than these numbers. We'll see how that plays out. But I do know one thing, and China plays the long game. They don't care what happens this year, next year, 5 years from now. They think out 50, 100 years from now. And Xi Jinping, president for life, he followed Putin with that idea. So I think they're just going to be remarkably patient. But the bottom line is we still will continue to be net importers and not exporters. There's just no way that we can actually turn around to the degree that the president believes. So is that going to hit real estate? Oh, sure. It's a good side. I'll talk about that in a second. But the other part of this is immigration policies. Non-immigrant visa renewals. If your visa expired, you used to have 4 years to reapply. Now it's 12 months. We've got over 3 million visas which are going to be expiring next year, as in those people will not be in the workforce. So think about it this way. A lot of us, when we were coming out of COVID, when the labor market was so tight, what happened to wages? They went up. They did. People are saying, oh no, you want me to come back to work? You got to pay me. Is that inflationary? Yes, it is. And so because of that, a couple of things. One, immigrants are a very, very big part of the population. In fact, in terms of civilian labor force, population growth, massive. And they really were. About 50, almost shy of 50 million of them in the US right now. If we do kick out the illegal aliens that are here, that could cost us almost $100 billion to do it. But they do tend to take a lot of jobs in the service industry. And it's going to be more lower-paying jobs, and that, again, will start raising prices up. Because I think you may well remember when we were coming out of COVID, and we started staying in hotels again, did you find your hotel room night cost that much more? I bet you did. Why? Because all the people that laid off on day one of COVID that were in the leisure and hospitality industry, well, they were all told to come back. They're like, yeah, no. Clean these diseased rooms? Absolutely not for that amount of money. So we actually saw wages increase by almost 8% per year for that period. And that, again, was passed on to the end user. Another part about reducing the labor force. So again, we are having fewer kids right now. We know that. And we're actually going down the same route that we saw with China. China was, back in the day, not that long ago, have one child, better be a boy, and we'll give you a tax break. Then they've realized the median age was 65 in the population. There's 1 billion people. Now have 3 kids, boy, girl, we don't care, get a tax break. But we're not doing that here in the US. Yeah, I blame millennials for everything, quite frankly, because I'm Gen X, we hate everyone. But they are having fewer or no children. So they're important. They work in entities and businesses that we tend not to want to work in. Again, you're at a higher participation rate. They tend to choose to work for a longer period. So if that goes away, wages go up, consumer prices go up again. We could also, through the H-1B visa program, which is a very highly skilled visa program, which we benefit from dramatically here in Washington State, as in parts of California and also Georgia, that doesn't happen. They bring in a lot of money. Businesses will then potentially look more towards automation if they haven't got workers. I actually saw a machine sheetrocking a house a while ago. Yeah, I know, scary. It really is. And finally, well, tax revenues drop. These people actually spend money they're making. So all in all, either way you cut it, it's a problem. But when it comes to real estate, it's a very big problem. And here's why. This looks at direct employment in residential real estate. There's about 8.5 million workers in construction in the US, about 3.4 million work in the residential world. No one's going to learn how to become a plumber, a carpenter, electrician. No one's going to trade school. I know that. My son, William, is a junior at Gonzaga. He's 20, and he is useless. No, I'm sorry. So when he started driving, yeah, I said, okay, you're driving, Spokane. You need to know how to change a tire. He's like, Dad, I know. I'm like, really? Show me. He's like, what's the phone number for AAA? Like, what? So that's why we buy it. But that's why I buy it, you parasite. They're not very handy, shall we say. And so again, the problem is that going to push up labor costs? Yes. Again, is that going to transfer onto the home price or the apartment rent or the office rent? Yeah, very much so. We talk about pricing. So I looked at the period, data 2016 till the pandemic, and this was the increase in prices for just general goods used in construction. Not all of them, but most of them. But from the pandemic till now, yeah. Is it different? Oh boy, it is. Significant increase. Now remember this, Not only do 32% of people working in construction are immigrants, because they are, 33% of the materials it takes to build a home, residential house, are imported from out of this country. I want to talk about housing affordability. Is that going to help? Absolutely not. So we've got issues on the labor side and issues on the material side as well. And therefore, because of it, and my forecast of the Fed funds rate, again, hopeful we'll see 2 cuts. We could see 1, we could see none. But unfortunately, this just goes back to 2016. Going back to before actually coming out of the Great Recession, the financial crisis, we become used to free money. That was it. It was great. What do you mean interest rates are high? Well, it's normalizing. We haven't seen normal for quite some time. And so looking here, I think they'll be very patient. The Fed's not going to want to get it wrong and have to raise rates. They'll hold them lower. Hopefully, they'll start seeing a couple of drops, quarter-point drops starting in September. They will be data dependent, but that could change if more of these tariffs are actually implemented. So the Fed's in a quandary, not sure what it should do. Most measures, the labor market's doing okay, but then immigration comes in. There are problems there. The growth was significant. It was because of immigrants. That's going to change. Tax cuts don't kick into gear until the latter part of this year anyway. But trade wars and these other things I already mentioned, they will act as a drag on US growth because we're just not sure what we should do. So that's what I think about it from a pure national economic perspective. But demographics are fascinating, and here's why. So this looks at population growth in every county in the state of Washington between 2020 and 2023. A couple of things to note, one of which is look at King County, right? Lost population. That was that mass migration out. And it's because of COVID. As was mentioned earlier on, I work with a lot of real estate brokers, and early days of COVID, they were calling me up left, right, and center, panicked, saying, Matthew, this is horrible. Everyone's going to move to Yakima. I'm like, no, they're not. Did they? No, they didn't. But we did see that migration. But when you break down migration, you look at natural growth being births minus deaths, a lot of red. Not here. Still more babies being born than old people dying. But that's not applicable across the state. Most, in fact, counties actually had more people dying than being born. So you weren't seeing that growth. But it was the domestic migration that was the bonus. Again, King County lost 75,000 people. Literally. Who are the beneficiaries? You guys down, oops, sorry, go back a bit. It was here, down in Clark County and also Spokane County. They're the big gainers, without a doubt. And down here, why? Oh, it's those Portlandiers. They were literally leaving Portland and coming across the bridge, taking up residency here. They're still working in Portland. And by the way, that bridge is going to fall down one of these days. I mean, you guys can't decide on anything. All the proposals, it's either 1 inch too high, 1 inch too wide. Yeah, you don't want to do that. We actually had, based up in Seattle, we had a small bridge in Skagit County, to the north of me, get hit by a truck. It just caused a complete shutdown of I-5. I mean, remarkably hard. So you've got that going on to the benefit here, and also Spokane. Spokane has got a housing affordability. I was actually giving a speech there a month ago. I saw a traffic jam in Spokane. I'm actually serious about this. It was quite remarkable. Anyway, but also talk about, again, the importance of international immigration. You added over 2,200 people moved to Clark County from another country. Were you doing better? And I know this about the Portland market. Why? Well, here's the total population growth. I mean, literally, the Tri-County area in Portland lost over 28,000 people in that time frame. Now, it wasn't just people coming up here from Oregon. Have you noticed more Californian license plates? Yeah, people are getting sick. California lost population every year for the last 3 years. That's never happened in history. Why? Forest fires, floods, pestilence, disease, and Gavin Newsom. So they are, just checking if you're awake. And they're coming up here. Why? Because we're cheap. Literally. They sell their one-bedroom used house in the Bay Area for $3.2 million. Oh, woohoo. I'll buy 3, please. So are you suffering growth? Concerns? Well, I say concerns. I'm sure the panel will talk more about it in a minute. But here's, again, I've got to talk about ownership housing because that is a better part of my world. Single-family permits in Clark County. We're doing great. Has tailed off the last couple of years. You're running out of land within the urban growth areas. And there is no political will, by the way, to change our urban growth boundaries. I sit on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, and I scream housing, and every senator is like, nope, no, we're going to keep them the same. But if you're running out of land, think about Econ 101. Limit supply, have net new demand. What happens to prices? They go up. And all of a sudden, the land price is an increasingly large component of the finished home price. So you've been doing okay. Who hasn't? This is Multnomah County. They haven't. It's been a long time. It really is, what, 2008? This is the last time they hit their long-term average in terms of pulling permits. So it's hard. So you've got people coming here. That's good. Are they contributing to the economy? Absolutely they are. So should you be building more? Yes, you should. But, yeah, this is actually taken from the front page of Will's newspaper. All of a sudden, increasing in fees. 25 cents for every dollar it costs to build a home are fees. Is that appropriate? Probably not. So we've got a great pent-up demand. We know that. Are you building enough? No, you're not. But when you think about sales, yeah, supply constrained. Yeah, we saw a big pull-off. We actually pulled some of that demand forward. That was going through COVID. Why? Well, mortgage interest rates. That's the thing is that the Fed, they lowered rates. They wanted housing stability, various things like that. But what they didn't understand was that that was going to support home values far more than you'd expect to see. And I can say that because I refinanced my home twice through COVID. I've got a 2.1% 20-year fixed rate mortgage. You will pry that mortgage from my cold, dead fingers. I ain't going nowhere. Why would you move? Now, people are moving, certainly, we're seeing that, and transactions occurring for 4 of the 5 reasons that people move homes. Job change, death, divorce, diapers, 4, but not the 5th D, discretionary, the choice to move. And also, if they have to move, are they selling their existing house? No, they're renting it out and still keeping that wonderful mortgage rate. And therefore, that does one thing. It allows prices to continue to rise. And here's the thing. This looks at the median sale price in the county going back a bit more than a decade. Big jump you saw starting with COVID. And what happened? 137% increase in the median sale price. Is that a big number? Oh boy, it really is. So have we done well on our houses that we own? Absolutely we have. But it comes at a price. And what's the price? Well, it's the share of income needed to dedicate to mortgage payments if you were to buy, making median income and buying a median priced home. Well, it's a number well above the number that a bank would like to see. I mean, still, it could be worse, certainly, but it is still very, very high. But the biggest shock is not from us with larger down payments, it's first-time buyers. They'd have to dedicate almost half of their income to housing. Do you think you'll get a mortgage? No, you won't. So those of you that still have the kids who move back in after college, I changed the locks, by the way, on my house. Yeah, I mean, it's an app, it's great. And I also stole his bedroom and turned it into my office. So he's really not coming back. But how do we allow these young people to get their foot on the first rung of the ladder when you're paying that much? Now, home prices here, to make it, in essence, affordable per se, it would have to drop by almost $85,000. From where is that going to happen? No, it won't at all. Let's look at it a slightly different way. Real numbers, by the way. If you'd bought a home, first quarter of 2021, you paid $450 for it, you'd have had to be making a bit under $95,000. Q4 of last year, $162,000. Have wages gone up by that much in that period of time? No, they haven't. Yes, we've been doing well, but then these are just real numbers. The great thing about economics is math. Math doesn't lie. We can bend things a little bit, but in general, it's black and white. And that's where we stand today. So are you suffering the growing pains of some of the larger metro areas? Sure, yes, you are. Are you going to see a significant downturn, as we are currently seeing in Austin, Texas, Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho? No, I don't see that happening. Again, because that supply-demand equation is there. But I mean, literally 20% down, prices dropping by $80,000, it's not going to work. It really isn't. So build more would be great. Builders know that. Any builders here, by the way? Yeah, no? Okay, great. They know there's always demand. And here's the problem. There's so many obstacles in their way. And we know we've got first-time buyer demand, absolutely. Millennials are getting older. The oldest millennial turns 43 this year. Yes, fewer kids, but if somebody could figure out a home that a millennial home buyer could, one, afford, and two, that they would want, and by the way, what do they want? Dog showers. I'm not kidding. There's actually a place in Seattle which is a doggy babysitting. So you take your dog in the morning for $800 a month. I must be old. Dog babysitting for me is open up back door, kick dog in the arse. It's a brave new world. So there's that demand there, but are we keeping them away from it? Yeah, I mean, I teach at University of Washington. I used to teach undergrads. And at the end of a class, one of my students came up and said, well, Dr. Gardner, I hear what you're saying, but didn't you say that we're going to see the biggest transfer of wealth that this nation's ever seen between you old people and us? I'm like, you what? And he's actually, was a Husky football player, quarterback. He's now a quarterback with the Bengals, making more money than I'll ever make in my life. But I said, well, yes, you're right, but here's our goal. We are going to die, sure. We're going to die bouncing a check and with a modest hangover. I'm out the God's ears. But in reality, where that transfer of wealth is going to come is in the form of real estate and housing. Very much to be the case. So just before I get finished, I was asked to touch briefly on distress. Everyone's worried about the commercial markets, office, hotel. So I ran some numbers for my friends at TREP. Watch listed, meaning these are, in essence, you've got buildings which have debt on them. Debt's going to mature. We know it's financed in a different way than mortgages. These people are still paying their rent. They're still paying their mortgage. But they're being watch listed, meaning that at some point down the road, they're going to have to refinance. Is that going to be a problem? So no one is in special servicing right now. Certainly the return to office is a big thing. One multifamily building, one office building. Retail's a bit hit a bit more, but in general, it's really not that bad. So anyone expecting it, that we're going to see a catastrophic failure in the commercial markets, I don't see that happening. I think pretend and extend will happen, no doubt. But we are going to continue to see more people coming back into the office. A couple of years ago, I gave a speech up in Seattle to the CEOs and said we could have had a recession. They applauded me. And I said recession. This is great. Why? So we're trying to get people to come back to the office now, and they're saying, no. I like rolling out of bed in my bunny slippers. You can't make me come back. You try. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to go to the business next door. They'll pay me more money. Well, bunny slipper has moved from one foot to the other. Now people are concerned, and they're quitting their jobs far less. Layoffs are increasing. So I do expect to see a continued push to get more people back into the office. Will we ever go back to 5 days a week? Some companies, sure, selectively they will. But in general, no. It will be a blend. But we will certainly start seeing those occupancy rates in our commercial offices start to notch up. So in closing, what do I think? I think that the amount of uncertainty out there today is massive. And even if we don't see tariffs, then it actually could be what I call an expectation tax. And that is because we think it's going to happen. And so we adjust our buying accordingly. We change our mannerisms because of something which hasn't happened yet. And that can certainly slow the US economy down very, very significantly. But midterm elections in a couple of years. So we'll see what happens there. I'm hopeful that we will not see everything implemented that the president's suggesting right now. I hope not, because I can't lose any more hair. It was bad. But ultimately, never underestimate the resilience of the US consumer. And we are out there. Yes, we want the best of both worlds, but at the same time, we can work through things. So I am glass half full is still my position. That could change tomorrow, and we'll make sure I'm aware of that if I'm ever wrong about anything. But ultimately, I think that uncertainty, when we start getting hopefully some more clarity with what's going on, we will then be able to make some more astute, attuned decisions. But again, it's very easy to write us off. Don't do that, because I've got a feeling that we will come back and we will flourish. It's just going to take some time before we actually know really what is going on. And I will keep on reading X at midnight every day and let you know. I'm not giving you my phone number, by the way, that if things are going to change or not. You've been very patient with me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the program. I think we've got questions a bit later on. So enjoy the next speaker. Scott's a great guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Enlightening. You think that was more optimistic than 3 years ago? I'll ask you on the panel. Hold your thoughts. I do remember him disparaging millennials as much as he did 3 years ago, too. So I want to now invite up our next speaker. This man is back by popular demand. He's been a part of this event for almost 40 years. Scott Bailey retired last year as our regional employment economist. He was working for the state, and so he's now working as an economics instructor at Clark College, and you can go take a class there if you're interested in what he's saying now. But and I don't know, Scott, if you noticed the picture that goes along with your presentation right now.
Oh my God.
What year do you think that's from?
18. Yeah. My friends and I share some pictures from. My God, my hair is dark, and there's more of it, and that beard is.
I had to go through our archives pretty far back to find that,
really
but
nice.
Please welcome to the stage Scott Bailey.
Okay. Can everybody hear me? Sorry, I've had a virus all week, and I'm just getting over it, and I'm sucking on a cough drop right now to kind of keep things under control. So thank you to all the sponsors. Thanks for the Columbian for inviting me back. And this is, I don't know, the third time that Matthew and I have been on the same panel, and he's great. It just, yeah, total mutual respect there, as opposed to some other guys. So, yeah, sorry about that. So about, I think it was like 2009, 2010, we had the Great Recession, we had hit bottom, and there was a lot of talk about what's the recovery going to look like? Do you remember there was a V-shaped thing, you know, a quick snapback, there was the W for the double recession, there was the U where we'd bounce along the bottom and then whip back up, yeah. And my prediction then was it was going to be long, slow, and painful. And so somebody started calling me Dr. Doom, and the name stuck. And it turned out I was right. You know, once every 10 years I get something right. But it's really unfair to think of me as Dr. Doom now, besides somebody else now has the title, as you'll see in a little bit. The last couple of years I've been Little Miss Sunshine. Because I've been trying to convince people that the economy is actually better than you think. So it was about almost 3 years ago when we had a little blip in gross domestic product. It went down a little bit, 2 quarters in a row. And the media freaked out. We're in a recession. And all of a sudden, every economist who had access to the media, with the exception of Mr. Gardner, was saying, we're in a recession or about to go into one. And they kept that up for 2 years. You know, and after a year, they just simply doubled down. And I don't think one of them ever went on, you know, CNBC or whatever and said, yeah, I was wrong, so maybe you shouldn't take my forecast to heart. Nobody said that. But if you look at what's happened is that the last couple of years, there's been kind of a disconnect between how people view their own personal finances and in how they view the economy and how the economy really is. So this is an annual survey from the Federal Reserve Bank. So how's your own personal financial condition? And you see, it's pretty much the same, even through COVID, which says something about the COVID stimulus package and how it kept households together. But if you look at how they viewed their local economy, of course it went down in 2020 and 2021. But to get worse after that? And the national economy, totally in the dumpster in their view. And that just did not match what was really going on. And maybe you've heard that old 60% of households are living paycheck to paycheck thing. I read it on the internet, so it must be true, right? Because this clearly says, no, that's not happening. And there are other questions on that survey which just reinforce that view. And I knew I was going to space out sometime or other. So one thing I want to say, Matthew kind of dissed the younger generation. I have 2 kids. One of them is a professor at Gonzaga, where his son is a student, and is a homeowner, or at least a mortgage owner. Number 2 son took his history degree and became a carpenter, and is a homeowner in Portland. One in Spokane, one in Portland. Unfortunately, his partner works for NOAA, not as a contractor. We'll see how that one flies. So I want to question all of you to think about what's your view of the economy? How do you come to that view? What sources of information do you read to come to that view? Because when I was doing presentations all through the last couple of years, how many of you think we're in a recession or about to go in one? And a good majority, until this last year, was like, oh yeah, we're toast. Okay, so I'm going to focus on what's happening in Clark County. This is mostly, my overall summary would be, things are pretty decent here until you disaggregate the data. And then we've got some issues. So this is what happened to employment nationally during COVID. We had about a 15%, almost 15% drop in employment very suddenly in a 2-month period. And then most of it came back over the summer, or about half of it came back as we sort of figured COVID out. And then there was a strong, steady employment recovery that actually is still doing really well in terms of jobs added every month. Here's the state of Washington. And it pretty much tracked the nation until October of 2023, when it weakened a little bit. I went in and did a deep analysis to see what caused the state to have that little hiccup then. And well, that was the month I retired. So clearly it shook business confidence and investment dropped and hiring slowed down a bit. That's Seattle. It's struggling to add jobs, as is Portland. So, and this is true of some other major metro areas. But these 2 cities moved from sort of top 10, 12th in the nation among major metro areas down to 35th out of top 50. So not good, either one of them. And there's Clark County up through the benchmark data, and there's preliminary data that will be revised. And I actually already revised a bunch of this stuff because there was some stuff. And I checked with our folks in Olympia, and they're like, yeah, that's probably what's happening. But you see, we had extraordinary employment growth, much faster than the comparables. And it's about 2% year over year right now. Pretty decent. So Matthew talked about what's going on population-wise. This is natural increase over, 60 years. Again, that's births minus deaths. And you see, especially in COVID, it's dropped. And that's because simply people are having fewer kids and old people. There's a lot of us that are starting to get up there. And on the other hand, net migration, people moving into Clark County as opposed to people moving out, has been really strong. And that's another indicator of how strong the economy is here. People move for 2 reasons. I want to retire to somewhere sunny, that's not Clark County. I want to get a job, that's Clark County. And have a great place to live, that's Clark County. And This is a big deal, not only in the United States, but as you'll see in a second, but internationally as well. So the people need to have an average of 2.1 kids in order to keep the population, that's the replacement rate, to keep it steady. It's been down to 1.6 in the US and keeps trickling down, which means without immigration, we would be losing population. So this whole, what are we doing about our immigration policy is real interesting. And if you look at it globally, it's also coming down much faster than predicted. And not only in the usual suspects, we know it's been low in Europe for years, Japan, China, but also all of Southeast Asia, the tiger economies, Latin America, Central America, getting down towards the replacement rate all over. And this is why world population is predicted to peak out in 20 years or so, 30 years maybe, and then start to decline. As a society, sooner or later, we are going to have to deal with declining population. And that's happening already at the small college level. You may have read about small colleges across the country, a number of them closing their doors because of the drop in that population of that college-age student. And we need to, A, not panic about it. B, there appears to be very little that we can do about it. Incentives have been tried. They really don't work. This is just happening for all sorts of reasons. There's no silver bullet. Okay, another thing that's been happening in the county in terms of the workforce is that it's been slowly getting more and more diverse. Not as diverse as the state and nation. But so the green line there is the small Pacific Islander population. Next line, Native Americans, African Americans, multiracial Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos. So a steady growth, and especially pretty rapid coming out of COVID. And Matthew noted that the increase in new immigrants coming into the county. But if you look at wages by racial category and by men and women, so this is 30 years ago, roughly. So at that time, African Americans, the average wage was 85% of the average for all workers. So it was lower for almost every racial group, Asian Americans slightly above average, and about 22% above average for male workers, and about 22%, something like that, below average for female workers. And these are only broken out male, female, no other gender information. And don't look for that in the future. But here's how it's changed in 2023. Just the only group that's advanced and over the average, the Asian American, and Asia's a big country. It's a very diverse group of immigrants. Yeah, Mike, you remember that one. So it doesn't mean that every Asian American is earning more than the average. It's a very diverse group. So, but other than that, very little movement towards more equity, and only a pretty small movement in terms of male-female. And yet, what's happening with policy? We're not going to talk about it anymore, apparently. Median household income, more good news for the county. 2020, there was no survey information because of COVID. So there's the nation, there's the state, and there's Clark County. So doing quite well there. A poverty rate, kind of similar story. I think that last big dip down in 2023 is a blip, survey error. I would expect it to see it pop back up in 2024. So I don't think the real rate dropped there. So imagine smoothing that out a bit, but still going in the right direction. However, when you disaggregate income, So this is going to take a little bit of explaining. If you look at the bottom 20% of households, their average income in 2023 was $24,773, which was an increase after adjustment for inflation of $2,000 plus, 12% over a almost 20-year period. Then take the next 20%, you see a big jump in dollars, higher percentage growth in income, and the dollar amount is really important here, because even if that bottom 20% had had a 30% increase in income, it's not very much dollar-wise, and dollars are what matters with income. And you see the percentage go up as we go up the income scale. So disparities have been widening in the county over the last roughly 20 years, and the top 5% even more so. So a couple of things. If you look at the data for 2022, there was actually a kind of substantial drop in that top 20%. And I'm not sure why, and I'm not sure if that's sample error. So that may be a one-year blip that blips back up next year. I don't know if it was the stock market and the wealthier people here made bad investments in 2023. I don't know. But overall, I expect income to go up in 2024, but I wouldn't be surprised to see these disparities widen, because that's been the trend for almost 20 years now. Which means renters, which are typically the lower end of the income scale, about a third of the county, are considered cost burdened if more than 30% of their income is going to paying rent. And that's half the county, half of our renters, which is 1/6 of our households. And if you look even deeper, it's about over 20% of renters are paying half their income or more in rent, which ties in with a bunch of what Matthew was talking about. And if you look at home ownership by race, which is the closest thing we have to a wealth measure, because for most people outside of the top 10 to 20%, their house is where most of their wealth is. And you can see large disparities there. And these are the disparities that compound over time as wealth is, we talked about that largest wealth transfer. Well, that wealth transfer is disproportionately large for the upper end and small for typically African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and so on. Matthew talked about the return to work. This is 2023 data, and you can see the shift from before COVID, that roughly 19% of people who live in the county with a job work at home, a big increase over pre-COVID. Some of that were people who are working in the county, and some of that were people who are working in Portland. You see the shift there. I think this data, because I've compared it with other surveys, is mostly completely virtual workers. And probably another 15%, 10 to 15% are working hybrid. So I think if we're talking some amount of working at home is 30 to 35% of the population. And it didn't change very much at all from 2022 to 2023. We'll see what 2024 looks like. Sarah Wolf did a nice article a couple of weeks ago that interviewed a couple of major employers, and they said, yeah, we got no problem with people working virtual. It's working. The hybrid thing works for us. So we'll see. Finally, why haven't prices come down? So there's been a big debate over a couple of years, what caused inflation? And some prominent economists said, it's all about the stimulus, it was way too much, blah, 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 blah. Most studies have shown that the stimulus, by giving people more money, contributed a relatively small share of that inflation. Some of it was supply chain. You know, we had trouble getting parts, so when you have restricted supply, price goes up, basic economics. Both of those went away. You know, the stimulus is pretty much gone, or maybe completely gone. The supply chain thing is pretty much worked out. Why didn't prices come down more or slow down more? Because this is still up. Major corporations who had market power, when costs started going up due to supply chain, said, oh, we'll raise our prices and then knock them up a bit more. So they took advantage of their market power to increase their profits by more than 50%. And if you do the math of how many hundreds of billions that is divided by population, it's a couple of thousand per person. I wouldn't recommend that as an economist to say that's how you equivocate it out. That's the wrong word. But it gives you an idea of the size of what that increase was and likely what it means to what we're paying extra. I want to end with one good news about the Trump administration and their economic policy. Knock on wood that it continues. President Biden was the first president in going back to Carter who actively enforced antitrust laws. They sued a ton of corporations, large and small, on basically having monopoly power. And they were winning cases, a lot of cases. This was good news, but the backlog, as you see, was substantial. The Trump administration, right off the bat, sued to stop a merger that was clearly anti-competitive. Hewlett-Packard and Juniper Systems. Whoa, that's good, because they would have dominated the market, jacked up prices. That's what happens. And then they announced that the Biden administration had adopted a new merger policy about what corporations needed to disclose when they were about to merge. And the Trump administration just announced that they were keeping that policy. That's also very good news, because Wall Street hates that policy. That's good news for us. So hopefully that's it going forward. I'm not going to talk about this, maybe because but there's stuff that, and I would add crypto. Ooh. That's how to get a hold of me. Of course, this email address goes right to Riverview.
Scott, go ahead and stay on stage.
Oh, good.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Okay, we are going to invite our panel onto the stage now. So welcome up. So I just wanted to, you all know Scott and you all know Matthew. So I wanted to introduce our other panelists here.
Did you miss what keeps me up late at night?
I'll ask you later if there's enough time. So I want to introduce our new Washington State Regional Labor Economist, Emily Robertson. So she replaced Scott Bailey in his role, and so she studies the local labor market of Southwest coastal Washington and helps local community partners find and use labor market information. And so actually, economics is your second career. Emily went to culinary school for baking and pastry, and she worked as a professional as a baker in San Francisco and Portland for nearly a decade. So I'd also like to welcome Dr. Michael Wilkerson. He's a partner and director of economic research at EcoNorthwest with 20 years of experience working with the public and the private sector clients all around the country. So Mike he's been a lacrosse coach for 20 years, and he plays in league tournaments, including in Hawaii too. Is that right? Yes. So since I had some fun fact about these two, then I wanted to say one about Matthew and Scott, that Matthew every year heads up to British Columbia to disappear on a kayak, an ocean kayak, for 2 weeks, and they only live on what they catch in their kayaks or what they bring. And Scott Bailey, when I asked him this question, said that his wife didn't think there was anything interesting about him. But I pressed him a little bit, and he said that he enjoys birding at Vancouver Lake Lowlands or Steigerwald Wildlife Refuge. So thank you all to the panel for being up here. So I think I need to start with you, Mike, because you did a presentation in Portland this morning that has already been making headlines in the Oregon market here. So would you mind talking a little bit about what you presented and some of the response that you had from it?
Yeah, sure. So every year we do a report on the state of the economy, and it's about the metro region. And for years, the metro region was somewhat synonymous. You could look at any of the counties and they were doing generally the same. A couple of years ago, we started to notice a divergence between Clark County and what was happening in Oregon, and I think some of that Scott and Matthew have gotten into. And I think, in particular, what we're finding is the population is stagnating and decreasing in the Oregon side of the equation, and it's growing here. And the characteristics around where people are moving is becoming more and more clear. And I think what we're seeing is, economists think of ourselves as scientists. I would probably disagree with that, but sure, we can go with that. If you wanted to design a natural experiment around tax value proposition, so how much can you tax people relative to what they're receiving on a service, you would do exactly what was done and where we sit here in the country, which is you have no income tax on this side of the river, you have had amongst the highest and has recently moved to the highest marginal rate in Multnomah County. And then you would say, you used to have to drive into Portland to work, and so you get taxed based on where you work, and now, as Scott showed in the data, you don't have to go into work every day. What happens? And what happens is people voted with their feet. And what that voting with their feet showed was the characteristics of people who are moving changed drastically in Multnomah County and in Clark County and a little bit in Clackamas and a little bit in Washington County. But effectively, for years, the average income of people moving into and out of Multnomah County was the same, and it was the same in Clark County. But starting in 2020, that gap widened to where now the average income of someone leaving Multnomah County is about $40,000 higher than the people moving in, and in Clark County, it reversed the other way. The average income of people moving in is higher than the people leaving. And the question is, what's going on? And so I think for me, what we're seeing is, on a map, we are adjacent, but if you look at the economy, we couldn't be more different. In fact, I would say we looked across the country. We don't find a metro region with two counties that are more unalike from a population growth and a job growth standpoint than Multnomah County and Clark County. And this chart is showing that. If you look at back to pre-pandemic, you take all of the top 50 metros, there's 250 some odd counties. Where do those counties rank on a percentile basis? Multnomah County is in the 6th percentile for population and the 4th percentile for jobs. Another way of saying that is that's really bad. Clark County, on the other hand, is in the top 25% for population and job growth. And so you don't see that happening in other places where you have an economy performing about as poorly as any economy in the top 50, while another part of the economy is doing extraordinarily well. And so I think some of the questions are starting to emerge in Portland around why are we not growing, what's happening, et cetera. But that's kind of the main takeaway.
So at what point is the issues in Portland going to start creeping their way over here? Because the county's certainly benefiting a lot in many ways. So at what point is that maybe going to start to flip the other way?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will point to the increases in taxes and the lack of service provision as one of those reasons, and it absolutely is. It's not the only reason. Lack of housing affordability and lack of housing availability is a challenge. I think what we're seeing here is, yes, we are building a lot more than on the other side of the river. We are building more actually than on average Washington State and nationally, but still not enough to keep up with that latent demand because we have underproduced housing for so long. Even if you are building into it, you have a deficit that you're trying to chip away at. And so housing affordability, I think regionally has been our strength, but increasingly on this side of the river, you don't really have housing that's affordable. And in fact, rents are actually higher here now than they are on the Oregon side of the river.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk to Emily. So Emily, you've been studying the local labor trends right now, and you actually have a lot of the data that Emily provides us in your special section there, I believe on page 4. So if you wanted to flip to that right now, then I wanted to ask Emily to kind of break down what you're seeing, and what you maybe predict for the year ahead in terms of those numbers.
Yeah, so for our labor market data, what we're really seeing is some industries doing really well, some industries doing okay, and some industries kind of like eh. So the data you have now is actually not our official numbers. These are our employer demand reports, which kind of look at the job posting side. So this is sort of what employers are asking for. And I think the trends that you see in these like top 10, top 20 lists are kind of the same ones that we've seen in terms of industry data. So, Scott was talking about the Clark County data growing about 2% employment growth over the year. A lot of that growth has been in the healthcare sector. So education and healthcare, particularly healthcare, those health services have really been the strongest sort of source of growth within the county. There are some other areas that are also doing really well, professional and business services, so that's a huge one in Clark County in particular, a major sector, and that's also seen a lot of growth over the last couple of years. Some growth as well in a couple other industries, and then there are some that are kind of not doing as well as you might expect or like want to do. So like manufacturing has been pretty stagnant over the past like couple of years. And we do see some like dips and rises with that, but for the most part, it hasn't been kind of as strong as a sector as for the size of it is in our county. Retail trade has been kind of an interesting one. Retail trade has been, that has by far the biggest dips for COVID, but has kind of come back strong. And then in the past year or so, hasn't been performing as strong as you would maybe expect it to. And the kind of interesting thing that is to contrast retail trade with something like leisure and hospitality, which has been doing actually pretty well. And you'll see like a lot of the job postings data are in that leisure and hospitality sort of area. I always tell people, I talk a lot to colleges and small governments, like if you're looking at what occupations to go into or to encourage people to go into, it's always healthcare. Healthcare is by far the number one, but that's been the strongest source of our labor market recently. How long will that continue into the future? I think it's kind of a wait and see, but right now that's been the kind of most consistent trend within the county and with a lot of my counties as well. So.
Okay. Scott, do you have any insight on what you've seen with the local labor numbers, considering you've been looking at them for 40
totally
years?
Check. I'm sitting here, Donnie. Yep, that's what I saw too. The only slight thing I would say would be with manufacturing, you really see productivity growth pretty steady. And so even a small gain in manufacturing, you almost want to add 2 percentage points to in terms of employment, because if manufacturing were unchanged in terms of output, we would expect to see a decline in employment due to productivity improvements. So the fact that there has been, I think a little, over the year it's up a little bit, is a positive sign.
Okay, I want to go down the line and ask what you're most optimistic for about the administration in terms of a Clark County-wide focus, and what you're most worried about.
Me, really? Okay. Optimistic. Wow. I'm hopeful that there are enough people in DC now that are actually smart. So if you think about the Commerce Secretary certainly is the smart guy, Labour Secretary as well. So I think there's people that hopefully will try and keep the train on the tracks. There are fewer people in the clown car as there were last time around. Put it that way. What I'm concerned about, well, locally, it would be very much what Emily said. Yes, I agree. Teachers, nurses, absolutely. Here's the problem. They've always got jobs, they just don't make any money. Then you've got to go back to that missing middle housing. Where are we going to house these people? They've got to be close. When we're seeing home prices escalate to such a degree, those are growing sectors, and knowing what they make, we're pricing out a lot of potential growth, and that's going to be a concern if you're looking to attract talent. To do that, you've got to get companies to move here. Yes, you're very smart here, so check that box. The second thing companies look at is how much do you have to pay people. Biggest part of cost of living is, salaries is cost of living. So that, I think, is growing pains of what you're going to see here. So that's the bad side. The good side is people moving it. As we mentioned several times already, I'll be surprised to see that slowing down. Looking at the growth here, and again in Spokane, as I mentioned in my comments, it's very significant. And that is going to bring money in, that's going to help grow industry. So I think where you are is one of the biggest benefits that you have within the state of Washington, certainly.
Emily, I know that you're somewhat restricted on your opinion. You can't say a lot of your opinions, but do you have any idea of things you're optimistic or pessimistic about here?
So yeah, I am not unchained like Scott. I am still chained to the state. But I mean, I think that's what our agency does, is we do sort of policy neutral look at things. And from looking at the data, like the data as it is now, I think there is a lot of reason to be optimistic. Like Scott was saying, like Clark County, as opposed to the statewide or even a lot of the other surrounding counties, is doing quite well. And it does have one of the most diverse economies, I think. And so I think that diversity is really a strength. Whereas, some counties have a lot of employment just in one specific industry, and that makes you vulnerable in a sense. And so I think the fact that Clark County's economy is so diverse in terms of industry is a strength. In terms of, concerns, up until, I would have said that energy has been an area that I've been looking into a lot in terms of energy employment needs in order to just meet the needs of the region. And that's something that I think is worth keeping an eye on for the future, just because we don't know what will happen with, build up for the demand for energy and, updating those systems. That's something I am somewhat concerned about.
Okay. Mike, what are you optimistic about and what are you worried about?
I mean, I am unchained, so my unchained will allow me to say that I don't, unfortunately, have a whole lot to be optimistic about. I think if you asked an economist and say, what's the playbook you would employ to have the worst case outcomes, you're pretty much checking all those boxes.
For Clark County or Portland?
Everywhere. In particular, I think our region is more susceptible because we're so reliant on migration here from the Portland side of the region that if the Portland economy is doing poorly, that's going to have some impacts here. This isn't like we can just say we don't care what's happening on that side of the river. It's the region needs to thrive. And I think you start introducing tariffs, particularly on semiconductors, as one of the most productive things that happens on the Oregon side of the equation. That can't be good. We know we're in a housing cost affordability challenge. Imposing additional tariffs is only going to make things worse. The interest rate environment, I think, is likely to be flat, more likely probably to go up in the short run than to go down. You're talking about mortgages, et cetera. I don't think you're seeing any sign that treasuries or mortgage rates are dropping. And so from an affordability standpoint, that's a big challenge. And then I think immigration is the big one in that our labor force nationally is not growing absent immigration. And if you look at this decade, 75% of the growth that we would expect to see in the country is from immigration. And so you take that away, we aren't growing, and that's going to have negative consequence everywhere.
Okay. Scott?
Yeah, just want a lot of agreement with the points being raised. And it's not that there are policies that would affect Clark County differently than, or over muchly here compared with other areas.
So the federal policies are going to affect everyone and not really Clark County specifically.
So BPA, the cuts there, certainly a concern. Forest Service, certainly a concern. I talked to Sarah Wolf earlier. She was trying to get numbers on the local layoffs with the Gifford Pinchot Forest, and nobody's talking. Just media blackout. And how they're not cutting firefighting, but they are cutting fire prevention. There you go. And also, those Forest Service staff, one of their main responsibilities is preparing acreage for sale to local timber companies. And if you cut staff, the pace of sales is going to slow down. So that's some potential impact on timber supply for local lumber companies. And then I would add in crypto, and I mentioned that. Hearing that we're going to do treasury payments using crypto is just mind-blowingly bad. It's a straight ticket to a depression. Depressions happen when the financial industry is unregulated and goes crazy. And crypto is totally unregulated. I mean, it's the Dutch tulips. Crypto has no value. And as Jamie Dimon, head of Chase Morgan, I forget which bank, said just the other day, crypto has two purposes: money laundering and human trafficking. There's no there. And if the more that, and I read that there's over a dozen states that are looking at doing some kind of crypto investment with state funds. Oh, that's going to end up well. Oh, yeah. So, along with everything else.
Of course, there's also, for all the problems that we've been discussing today, there's also this context of we've seen 4 years of this, and I think, Matthew, you contextualize that with there's fewer, what do you say, clowns in the clown car now. There seems to be more stability and more agreement across the board with some cabinet appointments here, but there's, go ahead.
Can I ask Matthew a question? Was it the Commerce Secretary who said, our goal is to eliminate the IRS because we'll have all that external money coming in?
Yes.
And
it's part of the Project 2025 is to eliminate the IRS.
Yeah. So just let that rattle around your brain for a bit.
Back to what we said on crypto, which I personally think is a Ponzi scheme anyway. Has it a place potentially? Will people, so lucky ones, make money on it? Quite possibly, but it's ephemeral. Just because you think something's worth, just I think my son's painting when he's 3 years old is worth $1 million, doesn't mean that it is. And the leverage on crypto is massive. And actually, Jamie Dimon quote was originally coined by Charlie Munger, co-founder of Berkshire Hathaway. Again, it's a scary thing. I don't expect it to be used federally, only for the fact that Wall Street will just have an absolute conniption about it. But there are those still people out there that are pushing that view. But at some point, the music will stop. There won't be enough chairs, and the leverage on crypto, that's what we should be scared about. There is so much borrowing on it; it's absolutely ridiculous. So I think that's something which to watch. Has it a place to buy a movie ticket? Maybe, sure. That's about it.
All right. So, sorry to interrupt. We have a few minutes left, but I think maybe what the audience is wanting to know is how close are we to a recession? I'm going to lob that out there if anyone wants to respond to that.
A lot closer now than we were back in November. Could we have one? Yeah, sure. Certainly, but I think the more we get in the way of what had been an economy that was starting to stabilize, let the Fed do its job. But right now, it is uncertainty, and that's what we don't like. I mentioned it several times. Markets don't like it, equity markets don't like it, consumers don't like it. And if we're not sure what's going to happen, we do nothing, that can certainly lead us into a recession. I'm not saying it's a massive one, but I think the potential, the likelihood has risen. And until we get greater clarity, assuming that we do, that is going to be a worry. I think it's always going to be out there, certainly for the next year and a half, if not a bit longer.
More uncertainty for a year and a half.
Yeah.
But before the
Midterms.
term is before the midterms. So what's going to happen with the midterm elections?
Well, I think it depends. If eggs are still the price they are now, the House will flip. Of that I have no doubt whatsoever. And that means you end up getting to a stalemate again. When you split the House and the Senate, historically equity markets like that. But in general, things don't get done. And so then we just see a significant slowdown. So it's really going to come down to the fact of, will we get inflation under control? And tariffs are inflationary, period.
Okay. Any other thoughts on how far from a recession?
So again, I spent the last 3 years showing charts of saying personal income's going up, employment's going up, industrial production is doing okay, and restaurant retail sales going up. And those are all key measurements used in determining where we are in the business cycle. And so based on that right now, and I haven't looked at the latest retail number, it's only 1 month, but ignoring the trends have all been good to, decent to good. So based on the current data, I would say we're nowhere near a recession. But all these uncertainties that are out there are going to have, just the uncertainty does have an effect. And to the extent that it starts to become a reality, then you get this policy challenge of what's the Fed going to do when they're, when the labor market weakens as prices rise.
Okay.
I mean, I would just say, I think to me quickly that a recession is a little bit of an, I think, antiquated way of thinking about analyzing the economy, in that regionally and by industry varies a lot. And so it's not like everything is hit at the same time, typically. Today, I think you could look at the housing market and say very clearly the housing market is in a recession. You look at production of housing today, nowhere near the levels it was at. That is typically a recessionary, but other parts of the economy are doing extraordinarily well. You can look at the Portland metro side of the Oregon side of the Portland metro. All of their private sector industries, every single one of them, lost jobs in the last year. That's a recession, but that's not a recession here, and that's not a recession nationally. And so I think you have to really start to unpack the industry specificity and where you're thinking about. And I agree, like Scott, broadly the national economy I don't think is at risk of recession, but there can be smaller industry specific and regional specific impacts that are probably more of a concern than what's happening broadly at the national level.
Okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to give a round of applause to our panelists here on stage. So for those of you who want to stay around a little bit longer, we're going to adjourn to the back of the room, and the panelists will be here to answer any individual questions. But I wanted to also say that you can watch this program again online on Columbian.com and on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much to our sponsors. Round of applause for all of our sponsors. Thank you so much. So again, that's Riverview Bank, Port of Vancouver, Alliant Insurance, Peace Health, Clark College Foundation, WSP, Tappanee, Bank of America, Ferguson Wellman, Pacific West Bank, and Laris Wealth Management. So I also just wanted to thank my colleague Kate Sacamano for helping me put on this event today. We could not have done this without her. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.